And I feel like the fan always gets villainized. But yet I feel like everyone's a fan of something.
They are.
So it's like
and the product doesn't exist without the fan,
Absolutely.
which is another.
Exactly right. You got two real big tropes that I think are explored in media often. One is the hysterical, fainting groupie. Then you've got the fan in the attic trope. They typically want to, destroy what they can't have.
The stalker fan.
The stalker, if you're talking Perfect Blue, Satoshi Kon, you can be a fan of things and be healthy about it. That's what we're trying to do on this show. So this week we are talking about what it is to be an anime fan, particularly what it is to be a Western anime fan. Well, hello, and welcome back to Gateway to Anime. Hi, y'all. What's going on? Charlie, what's up?
Hi, good to be here and good to have a very familiar and special guest next to me.
Hello. I love this whole video thing. I can actually see people, right?
Yeah, that's it.
It's first
got an
time
audience.
in the
Got an audience,
studio.
man.
Hey, guys.
Been a while, my friend. Welcome to the new studio. Obviously, you've spent a lot of time in here not recording, but your first recording
Mainly
session.
snoozing or
Hanging, all sorts of things. So this week we are talking about what it is to be an anime fan, particularly what it is to be a Western anime fan. We talk about Charlie and my rather extensive 20-year experience as an anime fan, how it has evolved, how it has changed.
Which is a lot. It's changed a lot.
It has changed a lot.
Interesting.
So it's a fascinating topic, and we're just talking about how some of the more toxic elements of the community and some of the more beautiful elements of the community and just how it all comes together, how we're always striving to become better people and fans of things and just learning to let go a little bit as we go along. And it's not just going to be a big pile on about oh, gee, how shit's the anime fandom community? Not the case. There are problematic elements of the fandom and there are wonderful elements of any fandom. But we're going to talk about what it is to be an anime fan as a Westerner, which is what this whole podcast is all about. But the thing is, Charlie and I have been anime fans for 20 plus years, and we've seen everything change so much. It's come from either Cheese TV, where it was mostly aimed at kids, and we happen to be kids, so that worked out really well for us, or you had SBS, where you saw the weirder, more left of center stuff, late night. But if you really wanted to be an anime fan, the only way you could get into it really was through piracy. And whether you had someone who knew how to do it, because again, we're talking the internet early days, a lot of, LimeWire, all this stuff. And again, we've talked many times about the VCDs that had Naruto on it for us. That came from a friend of a friend, and those VCDs did the rounds and created literally an entire group of anime fans to this day. And that was really the only way you could do it,
I also think around that time there was a bit of an explosion of anime DVDs being imported. So I
That's
think that
true.
JB Hi-Fi in particular in Australia had for whoever was there, good job. There was a full anime section.
It was Sanity as well.
Yeah.
In all those music stores.
Yeah, I think
Even
all of a
Blockbuster,
sudden,
like-
Blockbuster, we always talk about whoever the anime
Movie
uni,
land.
the uni student was ordering and stuff and ruined our lives. I think that before that though, because what I think was Naruto, before it got licensed by 4Kids and became a Cheese TV thing, because it did later,
Yes.
we very much watched Databayo subs.
We did
And they
Databayo
were
subs.
always, and everyone I think remembers this, it was in yellow,
Yes.
yellow subtitles. That was because it was done with such a fan, it was not, before it went through, not saying that subtitles are done badly now, they're great, of course, but it's become a bit more of a corporate thing. I think this, when things are done lovingly from fans for not-for-profit and making no money, there's a certain extra level of care there.
Yeah.
I know that I feel that way sometimes. That sounds like I'm saying that the poor underpaid subtitle writers, they're all great, but I think the translation from people that were just doing it for fun was really well done. So our Naruto, when we kind of got into it,
On the
I think-
VCDs.
yeah.
VCDs, which again were
I think-
definitely downloaded off the internet. And
that was Databayo.
That was Databayo.
And I think that the way it was translated was really interesting. They often took the time to kind of explain certain aspects of you'd suddenly had to pause it and be what does that mean? And they kind of just be this is this in Japan, you might not understand. This is not have a direct translation or that kind of
Very interesting. It's a really interesting time to be an anime fan, and it's obviously changed a lot now. Of course, Crunchyroll and Funimation it's still operating, but it's about to be amalgamated into Crunchyroll. Netflix now getting into the game. These, streaming services just weren't a thing. We're talking mid 2000s here. It was impossible. You saw the weird stuff on SBS and whatever, you know, Neon Genesis and Ghost in the Shell and stuff on the left of center, interesting stuff. But yeah, to get like Death Note or whatever, or even Naruto, you would have to go through people who knew. Because again, it wasn't easy to download on the internet back then. You weren't exactly streaming sites.
Sometimes people would put them up on YouTube and it would get taken out. But it'd be like part one of this, like that's how I consume a lot of anime.
I'm thinking back even before YouTube was a thing or before the internet was a thing. Like, well, the internet was obviously a thing, but it would take days to download anything that had a video content. For one thing, when it first started, it wouldn't have even been across broadband. ADSL would have been across a copper wire.
It's funny when I think about now we're so spoiled and it's amazing. We have got all these different streaming services. We get access to all these animes and we get them like, you know, simulcast and like it's insane. It airs there. You don't have to wait for months or like, because by the time Cheese TV had Naruto, it was years after.
Oh yeah,
like
we'd
years
already watched
and
it.
years. We'd already like seen it. I was already up to shipping it. And I was like, what is this? I don't care.
I don't even remember Cheese TV having Naruto.
It was past like I was
in high school.
It was after, it was like when I was in high school. So I was kind of like, and I was so offended by it, even though looking back, I'm like, it's a good thing it was licensed and people 100%. Like, but I think the latest thing that I see as a similarity between those old subtitles and the official ones is when people talk about manga scans and scanlations and translations through that and translator groups who do versus what the official translation is. A lot of fans get really attached to the, you know, illegal ones, which we shouldn't. But you'd be like, they did such a good job. And then, you know, someone come through and translate and be like, they missed the point of this, or like it's because they're not like necessarily fans of what they're doing.
Yeah.
But of course, like it's a job that has to exist and it should exist because we shouldn't pirate things. It's good that we don't have to anymore. Yes,
it is very good we've gone past it, but like it's an integral part of how the anime industry proliferated in a transnational setting, right? Like it's the only way that it happened because otherwise it just wasn't really going to get out to the West. And it wasn't, you know, it was only in dribs and drabs. And it's interesting actually because there was actually an economic recession in Japan, which granted copyright to overseas publishers in Asia. And that began the transnational development of its cultural products. So like this was during the big recession in the 80s. So before that, it was very difficult to get anything outside of Japan. Real hard. I mean, Akira did a bit.
That was a screen release.
Yeah, screen release.
America,
a few
very
of them.
slowly.
Yeah, but like lots of shows, it was because of the recession that they started to relax the copyright laws, which enabled them to start getting it out into the West. But like, again, piracy was absolutely integral to making anime the global phenomenon that it is today. These are the origins.
God, I would be so interested in them. My dream guess are the guys who started Mad Men in Australia because they were the first ones to like, you know, license Neon Genesis. And just because they got it, like they used to just send out VHSs and DVDs to people. Like, it's like similar how Netflix used to work. Like in that way they did that. But with anime, they'd post it. So it's like, that's crazy. They started there, then they ended up licensing it for SBS and that kind of just having the licenses for that product. And like it's just and Mad Men are the reason why we had those huge DVD collections in JB Hi-Fi. They were all licensed by Mad Men.
Yeah, amazing.
So, but that again, like you're right. When we started watching it, that didn't quite exist yet.
Yeah, they were just
starting to do that. Yeah,
because copyright infringement is a great loss to the Japanese economy. Like I have come with the exact number, but there's a huge number of yen that they lose every year. Well, especially back then, but it is the major aspect of Japan's globalization in respect to manga and anime. So it's like a really interesting history there.
Was it controlled in any way, do you think, than piracy? It's obviously a marketing
I think it was just
connection, but
I don't know. I mean, like it was just rogue back then. It was pretty rogue. Hey, you know, like it was
so rogue,
super rogue, and it was just like, whoa, this is a cool thing, and you know, here it is. You know, again, the VCDs arrived on my lap because of Lachlan, who obviously was on this podcast in the JRPGs episode. Shout out. We've talked about that many times, but like those VCDs, fair to say, did honestly changed my life. And that's not being hyperbolic. You know what I mean? Like it really did. It opened my eyes to this whole world, which at that point was pretty much only through very limited avenues that you could pursue it outside of piracy or people who, and you even had to know people who would give you or knew, you know, how to actually use the internet back then because it wasn't that simple. It wasn't like everyone had a smartphone. It was like the concept of a smartphone didn't even exist. You know, it was like,
God, no.
It was OG.
I guess that no one really thought they could probably make money off
Yeah.
like licensing certain things like anime that wasn't,
niche.
for children. As in like Pokemon
Yes,
obviously
of
was
course,
one that
of course.
was like
merch heavy and
I
Yeah.
feel like even when we had an interview with Veronica Taylor, who was a voice actor of Ash, shout out to you, Veronica Taylor, lovely
Yes.
lady. You can watch that video on YouTube. She's the nicest person I've ever met,
So
and
nice.
obviously a huge part of our childhood and a huge
Yeah.
part of us getting into anime.
Mhm.
But you could tell from her interview when she was talking about like I felt like they didn't really know when they first started voicing Pokemon or anything like that this was going to be
What it was.
a hit in the West, like the way it was.
Well, it's the most successful piece of human culture ever made.
Yeah.
From a monetary perspective, it's nothing else is even close. You know what I mean? It's like
Just so many tie-ins. You've got video games, you've got cards, you've got like the anime,
it's
you've got
insane how big that.
Can we sort of define what the difference between what you guys think is the culture of Japan and what their connection to anime is as a fandom base and what it is in Western society?
This is a very interesting, very, very interesting point. So what's fascinating, I think, as an anime fan, right? A Western anime fan, which obviously we are. So anime fandoms in the West, we are a subculture. It's getting bigger. It's the biggest it's ever been, but it's still a subculture. It's not mass culture. It's not. It's a fact. You know what I mean? Mass culture means Marvel is currently mass culture, which used to be nerd culture as well. You know, like,
of course,
which is fascinating to see how that's proliferated and changed.
They've got their own subcultures, even just around X-Men and Avengers.
But
I feel like the comic book is still subculture of Marvel. So it's like actually what we're talking about is cinema. And mainstream cinema.
That is
like properly mainstream.
Yes,
as
that's
in like
mass movie.
that's
That's
the
mass
movie
culture.
that comes out that everyone can go see. It's not like
cinema and live action film and TV are the mass cultural
and
sports, of course, absolutely. And these are the mass cultural dominating cultural texts, if you will, in Western society, right? But what's interesting is that Japan is the only nation on earth where comics, or more specifically manga, is the dominant form of cultural entertainment. And it's a mass cultural event.
And it's it's like all age groups, isn't
all age groups.
But I find it interesting though, because I always kind of, and this is honestly like in a twist of irony here, I learned this from mostly anime. But I feel like being an otaku, which is like in anime is a derogatory term towards someone who is a fan of anime, manga, that kind of thing.
Yeah, a person who has a hobby-related interest that might be regarded as obsessive, particularly in the fields of anime and manga. That's the official Merriam-Webster dictionary definition.
And I feel like there still is, like, I don't think that everyone in Japan is like, it is very much more mainstream there, but I still feel like being an otaku or being a super fan of that kind of thing is definitely something that is a niche there.
Sure.
Yeah,
well,
true.
That's all I mean, because it's the same way I would see an AFL fanatic is culturally acceptable here in Australia because it's normalized.
So it'd be similar to like, I guess like if it's Marvel, we were talking about here, like someone could go and be a casual Marvel person and know that they could watch superhero film fine, but they're not like obsessed with Captain America and have all the collection, that kind of, so it's sort of like, it's mainstream. But yeah, I do find that interesting because you said that a couple of times and I was like, I don't think the whole of Japan is into anime manga.
No, but it is the dominant cultural form of entertainment in that country.
Interesting.
And also because Japanese film, as in live action film, was at its peak in the 1950s. And of course, you've got Akira Kurosawa, you got Tokyo Story, Ito, I think that director's name is, I can't remember. But you had Japan being an absolute global powerhouse in the 50s, alongside Hollywood in many ways. But since then, it has declined heavily. And in the 80s, manga and anime really was set in the 60s. Once Osamu Tezuka did Astro Boy in 1962, maybe 3, that changed everything. That changed absolutely everything.
The style changed.
And that begun a serialized anime television. And of course, most of them are always based off a manga. And it's not uncommon in Japan just to be on a train and seeing like a 60-year-old businessman reading manga or a
12-year-old.
12-year-old reading. But it's because it's just so broad, right? But you're right. The otaku thing essentially just means obsessive, you know? And but also the term fanatic, which is where fan comes from, obviously, means excessive and mistaken enthusiasm, and was originally attributed to religious people, fanatics, of course. So everything's a scale, I think. You know what I mean? But what is really
like
interesting...
obsessive passion.
Correct. Yeah. Well, mistaken enthusiasm.
Or as opposed to harmonious passion.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's really interesting as anime fans in the West, it is a very, very, very gate-kept community in many ways. Not always, of course.
It definitely was. Though.
Definitely was. It's definitely better.
That's to do with the mainstream accessibility. It sort of became a little less exclusive for anime fans to like anime. It's like if you were an anime fan, you really had to dig deep into the corners of the internet and find it. And then you were like, it's a bit of a special club. Like, do you know about this anime? Like,
and that's like, as an anime fan, you didn't have what you have now with Crunchyroll seminars and all these conventions and things to go and celebrate your favorite characters and shows.
There were conventions, but they were definitely like now conventions are like huge events run with big celebrity guests. And I feel like even AX, which is Anime Expo, which is the biggest one in the world, only recently just started having like huge international guests. So we would like, most of them were fan run, very much local community based, that kind of thing. And now they've just exploded. That's another example of how fandom has changed as well. It's just become a bit more corporate.
Well, absolutely.
It's a business money-making venture now.
100%. But the internet's also afforded fans to become much more powerful agents, like possessing subjectivity, objectivity, and the capability to actually wield considerable power over how modern pop culture is produced. But what's interesting is that as Western anime fans, we don't have that power because we are still consuming this as a subculture outside of a dominant culture within Japan, where the whole industry is run and basically, like, of course, the numbers matter economically, but really, if we hate something as anime fans, and let me tell you, a lot of fan bases do hate a lot of things and they make a lot of noise about it on Twitter and Reddit and Mal and all sorts of things. No one in Japan gives a fuck, and it's a really interesting thing. You know what I mean? It's like, it's fascinating because like never before have fans had so much power to organize and to actually affect change. So, you can tank a Rotten Tomato rating or an IMDb rating, or you can get things done. I mean,
let's talk about that. Because, that's exactly what Bezos did with Ring of Power, and the owning of IMDb was able to remove, like, corporately, like from high up, remove any bad reviews or any way show would be destroyed.
Yeah.
And it still was because it wasn't good.
Bad, but it's fascinating.
But IMDb should be objectively
egalitarian.
Yeah, you would hope so.
Yeah, meritocratic.
I think the thing with the anime industry though is it's just like, I'm sure that the fandom in Japan has some power. But there's something
they do. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's like over here, Bezos is like an evil overlord. So that's interesting. But it is interesting. I kind of love that we can be like, I hate this, and it's like, okay, well then don't watch it. It wasn't created for you guys.
You can't fix
it. And you're like, okay, great. What's happened is that we've then got people who would take the elements of anime they do love, and then they've like things like Avatar: The Last Airbender,
100%,
that kind of thing, where it's like just inspired a whole bunch of animation. But you're right, as anime watchers and fans of what's getting produced out in Japan and being released here, it doesn't matter because we're not the main like target audience, and we're giving some, obviously some money is coming in. Of
course, money.
But it's not like, it's still not.
But the sheer volume of content that's coming out, you can't consume it all.
No.
That was one of the biggest things I noticed when I first started getting introduced to anime was, wow, where's the line, where's the end? So to have any kind of control
beyond the horizon.
I had someone ask me, they were like, are you not just going to run out of things to talk about? And I went, I haven't even scratched the surface.
Oh man, we haven't even begun.
There's like 30 plus airing shows right now, new shows that come out per season, as we talk about. You're kind of like, there's just so much, and it's I think out of anything, like. And
I've started focusing in on just what I like, which is sports animes. I've been smashing out Blue Lock finally, and then I've just gone looking for a baseball anime on my own that I've started called One Shot, which is fantastic. It's such a great premise, and that was from a list of like 50 I had to go through.
The Diamond, there's a ton.
Like
you're taking ownership over your own and subjectivity and agency over yourself as a fan. You know what I mean? So you can now pick and choose what you want, whereas before it was like, well, there's like 5.
Ownership is such a big part of being a fan though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Massive. Ownership is everything. And also a lot of these, what's happened now with fandoms everywhere because of the proliferation of the internet is fans have become institutionalized within social media settings or message board settings, whether it be Reddit, Twitter, whatever it happens to be, or private message boards, which they set up. There's an institutionalized fan base where a lot of the social capital is run through the perception of taste. And do you have good taste? And it's obviously a very subjective term, but this is how these fandoms are regulated in these online contexts. It's about what taste, is your taste good enough? And who are the people who set who are the tastemakers? You know what I mean? And also,
tastemakers?
who are they? I mean, who made you the fucking king? You know, like,
Who are the dreamers of dreams?
but you know what I mean? It's really, really fascinating stuff. And like the reason we started this show is because like, and I've softened as well. I used to be a little bit more insufferable. Like if you go back to season 1, when Charlie and I had the debate about subs versus dubs, and you know, my personal opinion is that subs are a better experience. I still believe that, and I will always encourage people to watch subs if they can. But if you spoke to me even 5 years ago, 10 years ago, even worse, but like 5 years ago, I'd be like, no, you have to watch subs. No, dubs are a waste of time. No, you're not experiencing. No, you might as well not watch it. Idiot. You know what I mean? Like, but I've softened because I'm old and sad. But like, you know, it's like, you
just realize there's a bit more like your own opinion is not
it's also
everyone's
context.
opinion.
It's contextual.
Absolutely.
And like,
if you don't know the subs from the dubs, then how are you going? Why would you ever
care?
decide? Why would you care?
Yeah. And as I said,
why would you even go look for it?
Yeah. Find it quite difficult
in your native
to
language.
actually read subtitles and enjoy something.
Some
or
people are
there's
dyslexic.
like you wouldn't want to watch subtitles.
It doesn't matter. Like, and again,
and the dubs have gotten a lot better. That's one thing to say.
improved.
Like there's a lot of care, a lot of like big, like people have really put in a lot of effort to that because of
I think I might have mentioned during that episode, but One Punch Man was a dub that I really enjoyed, and I actually was back and forth a little bit on it to get through it as well because it was in the background. I wasn't focused on the television. I couldn't just listen to the Japanese, of course. So I jumped into the dub and would get through the actual story. Would you join a dub fandom like page or group now? Though, like, are you that against it still?
It's not that I'm that against it at all. I think I even said in the podcast back then that if it means the difference between you watching an anime and not, then watch the dub. But like, I personally wouldn't do that because my interest lies in the subs and the subtitles, you know, and that's what I like to watch.
I've got some dubs I prefer over subs.
They're totally 100%
I
exist.
prefer Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood dub.
It's a really good dub.
Right.
So last time I watched it was the dub.
I generally tend to watch subs. That's how I've always watched anime. It's really, it's a personal preference and you can do whatever you want. I think that's the thing. Like, I also think that it's funny, you're saying you soften, but I actually do think that even those like gate-kept fandoms, that kind of thing I think that the new way of thinking is sort of like, just do what you enjoy and don't judge people. I think that's like the new generation's way of looking at stuff.
Why we set this podcast up, right?
So,
and that's what I was wondering. Would you still be pushing subs onto people with the risk of losing an audience member or a fan of anime?
No, I wouldn't push it. I'd just be like, look, I suggest you watch it with the subs, but if that's not for you, watch it with the dub. And if that's not for you, then it's not for you. That's cool. You know what I mean? Like, it's
that's
not for
your
everybody.
taste, but you're not pushing it.
Yeah, it's definitely my preference. And yeah, my taste lies there, but like, I don't care. If someone's like, no, I think the dub's better, I'm like, great.
Sam and I have actually both done quite a bit of study on the nature of fandom from an academic perspective, which is actually a very interesting line of study.
Fascinating.
Was it Henry Jenkins?
Henry Jenkins.
Yes, who is the number one probably academic who talks about fandom still, who is like the one that is kind of often cited, still writing, right?
Yeah, 92 is his major work.
Yeah, but I think it's funny, we both opted to do that at university because we both have like felt that we've been involved in fandoms, whether it be gaming, Western anime fandom, because that's obviously our reality of how we lived and how much that has changed. And also I think it's very interesting to see Marvel, superhero, like game, Dungeons and Dragons, all that kind of stuff that's now mainstream, now cool again. Like, you know, I think Stranger Things made it cool. I think that it's funny to see how it's all changed and like what different fandoms have meant different things, and some that have been like typically quite toxic. Like I can say this, obviously the gaming fandom, it's definitely a lot better now.
Still bad.
But there's a lot of misogynist stuff that's sort of there. Obviously we've got Gamergate, which is one of the most horrific, like, you know, examples, which we could talk about a bit later. But I think with the internet, with things like TikTok and people just kind of welcoming people into fandoms, it's kind of nice.
It's
my favorite thing is fan fiction. It's such an interesting one.
Funny you say that because there's a couple of things here. First of all, I just want to also just talk about the word culture, which is one of the most complicated words in any language. So, I mean, culture is obviously exceedingly complicated, nuanced term, which comes with numerous meanings. So I've got a quote here. Culture can be used to refer to the works and practices of intellectual and especially creative activity. And that's by Williams. But the thing is, sense of ownership over material is always prevalent among almost all fandoms, right? It's a sense of ownership. And fan fiction, one of the major like love letters to fandom, but also requires a sense of ownership. You take the product, and actually I don't know if it's actually Jenkins or not, but I think he definitely references it, whether it's his idea or he's referencing someone else, I don't remember. But the idea of a lot of fans are what he or whoever he references are cultural poachers. We poach things from creators, right? We take them and then we make them our own in many ways. And then, of course, that makes...
Textual poaching.
Yeah.
And
it's an academic term.
Fan fiction is very interesting because a lot of authors hate it, because they think that's their work being sold, but a lot of authors love it because they're like that they consider it like the ultimate kind of... And a lot of fiction writers who are now successful have admitted to getting their start with writing fan fiction because they already have a world set up for them. So Harry Potter fan fiction is probably the biggest fan fiction.
It's right up there.
And J.K. Rowling, despite being, a TERF and really not someone that I like to support ever, has always been supportive of fan fiction. A lot of Harry Potter fanfic writers have gone on to be massive like fantasy writers later.
What's that one you read?
Interesting.
Oh no, so I, like, full disclosure, still read Harry Potter fan fiction. Got back into it several years later. In high school I used to love reading it, And I think I got onto one, but I'm very picky about it. You only read the good stuff, and there's a lot of like just fully, if you ever go onto a fan fiction websites, make sure you are very clear about what you're looking for because a lot of awful things are on there that you probably don't want to read. So there's like a thing about the one I use is there's like a way to exclude certain tags and things like that. So you can actually like make sure you're not ever going to get that content, which is like what is I think most famously associated with fanfic is like weird porny stuff that everyone's like, what? And like it can be entertaining in that way, but like some of the writing on there is actually beautiful. There's a great one called All the Young Dudes, which might be one of the best books I've ever read, which is a Harry Potter fanfic. And everyone I've given it to has been like rolling their eyes. And then they've all been like, I sobbed. It was beautifully. Whoever wrote it, Miss King Bing 89, that's her username, is a like a genius author. I really hope that they have gone on to this stuff because they're always anonymous.
Yeah.
But there have been examples of people openly saying, I started out doing supernatural fanfic or this kind of thing. And I think that the thing is you get a world build and then people can kind of like learn to flex their writing within that. So they've got like an inbuilt like structure and you don't make any money off it, but people have actually taken off their stories and then they've released them with like different characters. Like they've kind of like, 50 Shades of Grey, the most famous example of a fan fiction. Twilight fan fiction that they then took off and just changed the names and,
I forgot.
And so I mean, not that it's a good fanfic, but it's an example of someone who
blew up,
made a lot of money doing that. Fanfiction is one of those things that is obviously like widely ridiculed, I think, to people who don't understand what fanfiction is, but I think it is super important and one of the most interesting creative aspects of fandom. It's creative and original, even though it's, taking someone else's work, but no one's making any money out of this. Fanfiction's an interesting one. I think that there's many studies done on it and it's like no one really quite knows what it is, like what it is about it, but it has such a hold on people enough that they will like sit down and write full novel length for free, like things on the internet when they have full-time jobs. And I think someone was being like, probably all written by 11-year-olds. I was like, no, I think particularly with the Harry Potter fan fiction, started when we were all teenagers. And now people who still write this stuff for fun are like adults with kids. Like you'll see in their author notes, they're like, sorry, like had to like, it's school holidays, so me and my kids have got like, like they're actually adults. And that's like, and as much people are like problematic, I'm like, there's a lot of fanfic out there that is not problematic, but there's a lot that is deeply. So please be cautious when you search these websites because I would never be supportive of that kind of stuff. I find being a fan of something is somewhat empowering. And there's this really great musical, actually, Australian musical called Fangirls. I've never been one that's like a big fan of boy bands. I never was like a part of the One Direction fandom, whereas this musical is very much about people who were dedicated One Direction fangirls and the power of like being a fan and having this community online. And that musical is actually so good. And it's great from a fan kind of like academic perspective because it's talking about online spaces and existing there and finding like community in like bonding over this one thing. And like, I find it interesting, but big pop stars, that kind of thing's never really been my thing, but I think it can translate to like many different fandoms that you have. Sport, like there's heaps.
No question. Well, it's fascinating that because hysteric fandoms have been around for a very, very long time. You know what I mean? It's like, but even the song by Phoenix, Listomania?
Oh, yeah.
That's actually about a German or Austrian composer back in the 1600s, Liszt, someone, Hans or Liszt or something, who literally caused mania from the fans. Like, of classical music. Yeah. Well, it was like the equivalent of
people
back
would faint
then, right?
and
fainting and all that stuff. But of course, as you mentioned, Beatlemania, like the real modern, like stereotype fan of what we know
is young females.
And this goes back to Elvis and this goes back to the Beatles.
Yes.
And it's interesting because you got two real big tropes that I think are explored in media often in respect to fandom. One is the feminized version, which is the hysterical, fainting, groupie, essentially, which is hypersexualized often in media and in perception. Then you've got the fan in the attic trope, which is the masculine version, and they typically want to, destroy what they can't have, and they become obsessed. And that's the Star Trek nerd, the hikikomori in Japanese culture,
the stalker fan,
the stalker. If you're talking Perfect Blue, Satoshi Kon, like
the troll fan,
and the nasty, dangerous.
I want to add, I reckon, and I find this interesting. I think Fangirls actually explores this. I think that the young teenage girl hysteria fan, mainstream fandom, is actually the masculine version is a sport fan. Yep. And I think that's funny because people wouldn't think twice if a young guy cried with his sporting team lost. Yet they will take the piss relentlessly out of teenage girls for crying because their favorite act is right in front of them singing to them. And I think it's funny how they kind of weaponize it against teenage girls. So it's like, why is everyone so afraid of teenage girls being fanatic about something?
It's fascinating.
It's interesting. There's a lot of arguments,
a lot of literature
on that one. And I think that it's comparing the sport fan versus the.
Well, it's also, music, anime, TV shows, movies, books, that cultural side of it versus sports fans. It's such a different world. I'm not trying to put all of those books and everything in one as well, but the sports fan is emotionally connected to something that's physical and played as a game and played in
has results
and played live and has results. I'm just interested in why they ridicule. Why do they feel the need to ridicule somebody who has the same reaction
completely
to a musician
emotionally?
Yeah.
To a musician. Yeah.
I also think it's interesting because obviously we're talking about literal dangerous fandoms. How many people are killed in sports riots? It's actually genuinely that is a real thing that is kind of
soccer hooliganism. And,
it's an interesting way that people really love to ridicule the teenage.
When the Chicago Bulls won their second final series in 92, I think it was 93, 92. The second series, it was it's a ridiculous amount, $50 million damage to Chicago for winning.
It's just
for winning.
No, 100%.
Back to your point about the nerd in the attic. So it is.
Yeah, the fan in the attic trope. Yeah.
Yeah, that's another whole thing.
It is. And if we're going to talk Henry Jenkins, there was a Saturday Night Live bit with William Shatner where they set up as a whole thing and basically it was a faux convention setting where basically he ended up losing his shit at all the fans, being like, "Get lives, God damn it!" That was the whole punchline of the whole thing, right? And it's sort of there's no question that these elements of fandoms exist. There's in The Simpsons, the itchy and scratchy fan is do you really some kind of magic xylophone? All of this stuff. So
she can fly, Xena can fly. What was it like? Yeah.
But these are fascinating things, and you see this in the anime community a lot. You know what I mean? You see, and especially people just getting really caught up over things which ultimately don't matter, but they do matter to people. And I think, there's toxicity and there's people who take things far too seriously, and it's a problem. But it's difficult to navigate. You know what I mean?
Well, it's search for that obsessive or that harmonious passion
100%.
for something. I think.
Yeah.
You can still exercise a level of passion without it affecting you or being toxic. I think that sometimes we're obsessive.
Yeah.
Passion for something might come in and create a negative connection.
100%.
Yeah.
And there's obviously dangerous obsession.
Clearly
is.
Satoshi Kon
saying
explores it incredibly
is,
in Perfect Blue. These things happen. There was a guy, the guy was obsessed with Jodie Foster who tried to kill Reagan.
Yeah.
Right.
These things can get super crazy and toxic, and that is the fan in the attic
trope.
trope.
That wouldn't represent a whole fandom.
No, someone with a serious mental illness, you know what I mean?
The Gamergate kind of thing doesn't represent the whole of gaming.
Yeah, Misery is another one. Yeah.
Doesn't represent the whole of gaming, and I feel like the fan always gets villainized. But yet I feel like everyone's a fan of something.
They are.
So it's
the product doesn't exist without the fan.
Absolutely.
Which is another.
Exactly right.
The academic writing on fandom is fascinating.
Well, there's a guy called Yaus who has a theory called expectation theory. And to piggyback off what you just said, Brett, the historical life of a literary work is unthinkable without the active participation of its audience. And that's Yaus. But he also says that the analysis of the literary experience of the reader avoids the threatening pitfalls of psychology if it describes the response and the impact of a work within the definable frame of reference of the reader's expectation. So it's these are, no matter what happens, you are bringing your own historical and aesthetic history to everything that you consume. And that is your own expectation. And if that's not met, people can get very upset. And this is where you start to see fandoms get very negative, very toxic, when expectation doesn't
physically violent,
absolutely, like
in a mob mentality,
100%. And you see these pylons happen. Like, in fact, right at the moment, at the time of this recording, Stampede has just come out, which is a remake of Trigun. The fandom is split down the middle because it's CGI. Studio Orange used a lot of CGI. And it's very different to the original aesthetic, that real classic 90s like aesthetic that Trigun is so well known for. The storytelling is completely different. And let me tell you, there are a lot of people who are very upset about this. And a lot of people defending it. Like I spent this morning reading through a couple of Reddit threads where people are just at war with each other.
So but you don't want to rehash. I feel like, change and things like that, like inevitably everything that you like will adapt in some way. You can't stay the same forever. No. That stuff's always like Trigun will still always be there for you to watch. You can read the manga.
I mean, is this a story world or an important story to tell? Because some stories are meant to be retold and told over again, or some worlds give us something that we need to, with a new lens, connect our current selves to. And I take things like Hearts of Darkness and Apocalypse Now, very different, but essentially that story was important, that descent down the river and understanding that madness, or even something as simple as Pocahontas, Dances with Wolves, Avatar. It's the same story, but it's a necessary story
and
to
colonialism
tell.
metaphor and everything. Yeah, it's...
I mean, every story, like there's only about like 7 original stories or something like that. You
That's
look
right.
Into it, it's a narrative.
Yes, I think
with Trigun, I think the reason it got remade is because people have been crying for a full adaptation of the manga. And I think that people thought this was going to be that, but it isn't. They've kind of taken a different. But I mean, I admire anyone willing to take a risk.
Look, I agree.
Really, I do, because I think that's when sometimes you end up with the best things. Like, yes, it could crash and burn.
Yeah. The Final Fantasy VII remake as well had similar response.
And if you're going to remake, I think that the 90s Trigun animation still holds up. So like, it's kind of like why if you don't just redo it, unless I guess you could do a whole adaptation of the manga, but like don't just do exactly the same. It's like, why are you just doing exactly the same?
Yeah, it makes no sense. So it's interesting, but also like...
I haven't watched it yet though, so I might watch it and be like,
otherwise
you're one of those Reddit people.
Otherwise you're just George Lucas adding in a couple of extra scenes and using new technology.
Yeah, exactly. But here's another quote from Jenkins here. So this is an interesting thing, I think. Like, he wrote this in 92, so I think the internet has changed this a little bit. But like other popular readers, fans lack direct access to the means of commercial cultural production, and only the most limited resources with which to influence the entertainment industry's decisions. So I think that's changed a lot. But at the same time, this is very apt for Western anime fans, because we cannot change a thing that they do in Japan. Like, we can yell and scream. You can yell and scream about Stampede and Trigun and be real upset about it. And there's nothing... criticism isn't toxic. You're allowed to criticize things or not like them.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing as well. People are, I think this day and age, like critics are getting like, people like, cancel the critic for not liking this thing. And you're like, that's crazy. It's an interesting part of our society is that we have critics.
You must critique.
Like, and that's fine. But like, I do think that if you like this, you're wrong, or like, or getting like
this
angry.
This is where it turns nasty.
And becomes
their expectations not met.
The protection of
it's
these communities.
It's ownership is this expectation not being met, which is just nothing but your own historical aesthetic context brought to the table.
Specialist analysts, like critics, are necessary for us to understand it on a level that we may not be intelligent enough to understand it, because the people creating these shows are intelligent people. It takes a lot to get any kind of story up.
Yeah.
So there's a respect there that I think should be given. And I think even if somebody dislikes something critically, the fans who are already fans, who are already owners of that product, need to allow that objectivity to understand it a bit deeper potentially.
Yeah. This is actually a really interesting guy called J. Harris Miller, and the text is called The Critic as Host. And basically, just sub out the word citation here. He's using it in reference to literary, but you can use it for any cultural entity. Is a citation an alien parasite within the body of a main text, or is the interpretive text the parasite which surrounds and strangles the citation, which is its host? The host feeds the parasite and makes its life possible, but at the same time is killed by it, as criticism is said to kill literature.
Is this Animorphs?
Well, no, it's Stargate. It is like
Stargate.
It's Stargate.
Sorry. Okay.
It's the Goa'uld.
I agree.
It's a fascinating thing though to consider. It's like when you've got the host and the parasite, right? And like you can think of it as the cultural text, whether it be a anime, a manga, a television show, a movie, whatever, and the fan is a parasite or the critic is a parasite. But sometimes parasites and hosts are symbiotic and can't live without the other, right? In the same way that a cultural text needs fans to make it proliferate and become popular and therefore economically viable. So it's a fascinating concept
and
where
hopefully critically acclaimed.
Yeah. Idea of like, the critic being a parasite or the fan being a parasite and the host being the cultural product itself is a fascinating way to think about fandoms in general. And like, just because parasite obviously is a very, very pejorative term, but it doesn't have to be, you know what I mean? Like you can have a healthy parasitic relationship. Yeah, so I just think this concept of parasite and host is interesting because even Miller says there are innumerable cases in the proliferation of life forms where the presence of a parasite is absolutely necessary to the health of its host. It's a really fascinating concept to consider when in respect to fandoms and cultural products.
Definitely.
I think a huge reason that fandom in Western anime has changed a lot, and I think heaps of different fucking things, like, including gaming, everything like that, is because the internet, when it first kind of came around, felt like everyone's personal journal. It was like the Wild West. So like people now are being held accountable for bad or like toxic communities, that kind of thing. Those views, people are. It's like actually, it's like reflecting on, and it's like, and it should be like it's good. This is all good. But I think it means that things like anime conventions, where behavior was really out of control for a while there. A lot of really bad things were happening at anime conventions that weren't well policed.
Like what?
Well, there was like a couple of awful instances. I don't want to get sued for defamation by this person, but there was like a couple of voice actors who were like, or like a couple of famous actors who were at other, like the Expanse guy, like that kind of thing, who just took advantage of their power with fans. And like, there's suddenly these actors who are like obscure voice actors who no one knows go to these conventions. They're treated like absolute rock stars. And I think that it wasn't that people didn't kind of police that or make it professional enough. So it came really weird very quickly. A bit rogue, like there wasn't enough kind of like actual things set in sand and safety nets. And a lot of these fans are really young and impressionable. And I think that that's never safe and that's not good. And I think that things like anime conventions, when I was a lot younger, I noticed a lot more kind of like people just taking pictures of you or just coming up and hugging you, or like kind of like you realize that suddenly you're like 15 years old wearing a sexy cosplay and there's like a 45-year-old photographer taking a picture of you. And at the time you're like, look at my costume. So I think nowadays it's what I've read. I haven't been to convention properly other than event coverage. But have noticed is that like there's a lot of rules. Like if you want to take a picture of someone, you go up and you ask them and you get permission and then you have a chat. And then like if you want it, like there's a lot more stuff that really should have just been happening that just wasn't at the start, because it was like people are now being held accountable and things have changed for the better in that way. So I really hope the convention community is a lot safer for a lot of younger people, or anyone at any age. But I think it's because accountability is something that now does exist on the internet, and people can call people out, and it's whatever your opinion of that is. I think that there's certain rules that have come in that have been good because of that. So yeah,
like anything, there's good and there's bad. And so Brady, from your perspective, like you've come into this, nearly 3 years ago. Jesus.
Yeah.
Wow. What was your perception of the fandom of anime been? I mean, you don't spend that much time in forums and whatnot, obviously, but
I don't. I do when I do research.
Yeah.
And even especially in this one, just to get across the psychology of fandom and understand where it comes from a human, where it comes from. It was interesting because I have definite emotional connections to my football team and the Australian cricket team and some shows, but not in the same way that other people have that connection.
Do you both do fantasy league, that kind of thing?
Yeah.
AFL we do.
Yeah.
So is that not just fan fiction?
That's an interesting
totally
point.
Do you know what I mean? Like I find it funny.
that.
Everyone's like lol, like that, but I'm like, it's the same thing. I feel like the sports is like, it's like a narrative. I mean, that's why people love wrestling as well, right? Because that is a literal soap opera.
Yeah.
Sort of like combining both. It's sort of like the truth of both.
Sports
you've got like it's gone boring.
Rail wrestling.
Yeah.
I think I have been aware of and protected by the both of you through my journey into this world, though, to be aware of some of the things that I might come up against that I wasn't initially aware of, when we started and when I started watching anime. From my perspective, I guess I think there is a real passion in the West and in our society for this new content. I think in some ways, and don't get me wrong here, everybody, in some ways we are just so sick of Western tropes, narratives, structures, that anime offers something different or something unique, a different take on a genre or
storytelling.
In storytelling, and the scale can obviously be larger.
Yes.
Yeah, and same with but even with things like Netflix having a lot of like international productions, stuff like that. You like people who I know exclusively watch like like Scando Noir, like kind of thing, or like things that are like kind of a version of storytelling from somewhere else. Yeah, K-dramas, that kind of thing, where it's just like, you're right, it's a bit different from what we kind of are used to as our mainstream storytelling structures. And that's why it's like so cool that the internet exists. And I love that. It's great.
And I've probably become more of a fan in the last couple of months where I haven't, well, more than that, 6 months or so, because I haven't been, I didn't have a directive to go away and go and watch this series, which I could never finish. And I would get like 10 episodes in and then I'll be on to the next one. Now I'm finally finding my own feed.
Leisure, yeah.
And it's sports anime. Who would have thought, Brett? Who would have thought that'd be your niche?
There's still some classics out there I need to catch up on, but
of course, season 4 Haikyuu. The final movies are coming out this year, people. Crunchyroll, if you want to give us some tickets to that, you'll get the most hysterical coverage you could imagine. But
just crying,
me hysterically weeping. I will be. I'm not joking.
Fangirl vibes.
Literal fangirl
That's vibes. Your Harry Styles. is Haikyuu.
My Paul McCartney. No, it's interesting you say that about the different style and what anime brings. Because someone called Susan J. Napier, who is Australian actually, and a doctor of anime, and doctor of an academic in respect to Japanese culture and anime. Fascinating person. But she mentioned in one of her texts, the creator of Ghost in the Shell, Mamoru, basically has described anime as being another world, a completely new world. And because it is created from scratch, essentially, drawing, you can do anything. And it is a real separation from the reality of present day Japan, which is incredibly regimented. Anime is one of the purely freely expressionistic mediums. And so in discussion between critic Ueno Toshiya and animators Oishi Mamura and Ito Kazurio, they spoke about Japan's very problematic cultural identity at the start of the 21st century. So Toshiya believes anime to be a product of techno-orientalism, an othering of Japan by the West that sees it only as a technological dystopia or occasionally a natural utopia. So anime in that respect is a dark mirror that reflects Japan to the West and vice versa, which is quite an interesting take on the whole matter.
Definitely an influence there, like that of American
massively.
Yeah, culture.
Massively, especially World War II, the occupation.
Yeah.
All of the Osamu Tezuka being heavily influenced by Disney and vice versa.
Yeah.
These are really fascinating things to consider. And when looking back, there's no question that othering happens. And that's why the concept of mukoko seke, which means stateless. So a lot of anime is drawn the character's not looking specifically Japanese,
or anything
really, like kind of not like, it's an American, you know what I mean? Like, it's just like they're stateless in their existence, and it's kind of, they could be anywhere. Cowboy Bebop's a good example. Fullmetal Alchemist, anything, Attack on Titan. These are things which aren't super specifically Japanese, but are also distinctly Japanese all at the same time. So that's a fascinating thing to be a fan of, because no matter how much of a fan we become of this medium, we aren't Japanese. Sure. And we never will be. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, no matter how obsessed you get with this, there's still a level we can't go to, which is fascinating,
Yeah, I think we talked about this before, but I think animation in general, series, that kind of thing, video games, that kind of thing, always has that kind of could be anywhere, could be like, it's kind of I think that's also just in terms of storytelling, it doesn't necessarily have to be like, it's because it's fantasy, really.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, of course, there could be an academic argument made for that, but I do wonder if it's to do with the actual medium having so much freedom and it's so huge. Like, because you've got anime that is very Japanese. Very. Any slice of life, any work, like, like anything very I watch, it's like the most Japanese. Like, you're like, this is set in Tokyo. We are in Tokyo right now, but you're talking about fantasy series. You're very rarely having fantasy series set in like America, even if you've got an American one. Like, so I do think that's maybe a genre thing over an anime thing. That's my 2 cents on that.
Do they, just before we move on, but like 2 points to that, I mean, is that a sense of government control, having anime like one of the only outlets or approved outlets for their society?
I believe it was actually due to a lot of censorship imposed by the Americans during the occupation post World War II.
Right. So it's their outlet.
That was one of the few things they could actually write without
being
censorship.
Censored.
Correct.
Sure. I would find it very interesting to see if there is any kind of responsibility for us as fans by the general anime creators. Like, do they, I mean, obviously the numbers probably aren't there the same as they are within their borders, but is there any responsibility to us as fans who are taking this, our own interpretations of these shows?
They don't care what we think. You know what I mean? Like they just don't give a fuck.
I don't even care what we think.
And that's
fair
the thing.
enough.
I think that's one thing I really like about it. It's like there's no expectation there. It's it's complete saturation of enjoyment.
Yeah, and
or sometimes it's a bit boring, and I go to something else.
Yeah,
and there's just so much.
There aren't tropes. You know, this anime has tropes.
Anime has tropey.
It's just tropes all over the place.
We love the tropes.
Yeah,
that's why we watch it. That's why we're fans of So it's and there's just so much that it's all very.
I don't always need the heartfelt, 2-person team talk. It's like, okay, yeah, you guys are gonna have a connection in the next game, like Blue Lock or.
I was going to say you're going to have a hard time with sports anime if you don't like that trope. That's like 90% of it.
That's the whole genre.
That's the whole thing. Blue Lock's the only one that won't do that.
Too much. But, but I try to make those connections when I'm playing FIFA. As a manager with a character, and I also try to make those connections with my real football teams. It doesn't matter how you look at it, any kind of like content is you trying to get a cathartic experience out of it, and that's what story provides.
Yeah, and I'll just throw in this quote here from Jenkins again with the fan man. But fans must actively struggle with and against the meanings imposed upon them by their borrowed materials. Fans must confront media representations on an unequal terrain. So we do institutionalize. We do find everyone wants to find this mimetic desire. Gerard's idea of we look for what we want. We want to mimic people who we think are successful or happy or share our ideas and values, right? And the internet is designed through algorithms and AI to funnel us into these filter bubbles where people agree with us and we like the same things, but it also knows that controversy sells and that they also shows you things deliberately to piss you off and upset you so that you get angry about things because the attention economy is predicated on you being upset about things. So it's these are also fascinating things to consider with fandoms because you do wonder, and if you want to talk about responsibility, like who is, like obviously people are always responsible for their own actions. Sending death threats to Hajime Isayama, the creator of Attack on Titan, is unacceptable whether you're Japanese, American. It's a ridiculous thing to do and it has happened to him quite a lot. So it's a damn shame and this is not unique to Western fans or anime or Japanese fans. It's just a thing across the board, across all nations. It's a damn disgrace. And
we're responsible for ourselves.
100%. But also
our own actions.
Absolutely. And we must always be. And as fans, I think it's just a way to check ourselves and like next time you're in a forum and someone says something you don't agree with, don't descend into ad hominem and be like, you're a fucking piece of shit. How do like you're bad, you're wrong, and therefore you should feel bad about it. It's like, dude, you can have disputes with people and disagreements especially about taste, basically a disconnect between tastes. And I love a good debate. Hell, one of my favorite things to do is debate things. But like, you don't need it to become about your identity as a person and feel attacked as a person because someone disagrees with your opinion.
It doesn't really matter that much.
It doesn't matter.
That's the thing. Like, so in terms of, obviously a lot of things do matter. But I mean, like if you're getting upset because someone didn't like the CG in Trigun Stampede, or like, vice versa, and you're like distressed about that, then you probably should just not watch it.
It's just chill, man. Or just stay off the internet for a bit. You know what I mean? Like get off that forum. Like don't worry about it. I don't know. It's just a fascinating thing to pass. And, obviously we set up this show
because we are fans. This is a fan podcast. So we are the fans.
We are fans.
That's us.
And we are always navigating ourselves.
You're trying to find new fans.
We're trying
to service current fans.
Hang out with the fans.
Yeah, man. Like, we're all fans of this. We're not perfect fans and we're not pretending to be, and we're not trying to be fans like us. No. Be your own fan. And if you like what we have to say, that's great. And if you disagree, let's have a healthy debate about it. It's all good.
Before we go though, I want to know what fandom you identify. Like, what do you think you're in the fandom of? Like what? Other than anime and manga, obviously, what would you say? I mean, no, I don't think I'm part of that. What else? AFL, cricket?
AFL and cricket for sure. Yeah, big time. But I've had to get off those forums as well and stop. And, because I just find like, you want to talk about toxicity, go to a sport forum, dude. Like, oh my God. And you're right. That gets totally normalized in society, and it's fine for men to get stupidly angry about something over which I have no control. And everyone seems to be okay with that, but you're right. And then it's like, but we look at a One Direction forum and like, then treat them as morons and like.
I know, it's the same thing. I
It's the
find
same
that
fucking
fascinating.
thing. Like, it is really interesting.
It's that majority culture though. It's numbers.
It
at the end of the
is.
day.
Oh, I mean, there's a lot of there was a lot of One Direction fans as well.
I think
it's
international based. Then
I think it comes to I don't want to get too far into this, but it's patriarchy and it's these systems of control, and these are there's acceptable forms of being angry apparently, which society is willing to tolerate, and those which are feminized, which has often been a way of imperialists to denigrate certain cultures in which they have imperialized and conquered. You feminize things, In fact, it's a very interesting thing which the Americans did to soccer in the 90s. They feminized it heavily and therefore stopped it having any chance of becoming a dominant sport in that country. Yeah. And it was a very, 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 very conscious decision that I believe was made by those who had a vested interest in the NFL. Just fascinating to observe all this stuff. You know what I mean? Like, and just to
everything is corrupt.
Everything's fucked. But yeah, I just think you can be a fan of things and be healthy about it. That's what we're trying to do on this show. And it's always a process. It's always a journey. We're always trying to get better. And, like, catch yourself, I get upset at sport.
I was going to say, you're one of the most upset people I've seen at sport. That's why I'm finding this very entertaining.
I'm working through it.
Stabs at you, like, it's so bad for people that flashes you.
It's actually,
like, boom.
So do I, but never at that level. So it's quite nice to have somebody else do it for you. And
I'm a passionate man. I've yelled at a few televisions in my time.
As long as you're not yelling at people, it's okay.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I've been
Daryl. Don't do it.
It's a process, and it is something that, like, we're all guilty of being far too obsessed with something and getting really upset about it and letting it really affect your life. And it's just something which, as you get older, I think, I've definitely mellowed a lot, even as a sport fan, as I gotten older. Just being like, fuck, man. Don't worry about it, like it's
not. Your teams suck. And
helps that my team's trash this last year in AFL, but it's a fascinating thing.
And
I think
everyone's a fan of something. That's the thing. Even people who are not, like, obviously the word fan is like very much connotated with fanatic and being a nerdy. Like, I'm a big fan of that, but I think everyone's a fan of something.
They are.
Like you could sit down and everyone be like, you definitely identify with some fandom.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue that politics is an element of fandom.
Absolutely, like anything. Like, so I think everyone's kind of a part of some fandom.
I too. Obsessed with my particular sports team, the Essendon Bombers, who are just as bad. I'm trying to mellow out on how emotionally connected I am to that rubbish team. Had a few chances. I don't know if I actively go out looking for news. I kind of get told things from other people about that particular team.
You stopped out.
I don't know if there is any kind of media I have to have that. I'm not sure if I have that in me at all. Like, besides maybe FIFA, I usually get the new game every second year, not even every year. I can take or leave a lot of things, I guess.
My fandom is exclusively fictional things. Like I genuinely, like, I like music, I like people, I like directors and things like that, but I think that I'm very much in the fantasy fictional world. Like, I find it interesting that, like, you being like an uber fan of like a real person weirds me out for some reason.
It is weird. Yeah.
Like, I'm kind of like, that's a real person. That's not a chainsaw man. Like, I kind of like,
I have chainsaws for limbs.
So I feel like pretty far removed from, and that's why I think that I don't take it that seriously, because I'm like, it's a fantasy thing. I find that interesting as well. But I'm not judging you guys for being into sport, of course. Obviously, I'm in the vast minority for not following sport.
Well, it's that contextual thing. I've grown up with that. I've grown up with anime. It might be that. I love The Simpsons, but I haven't watched that in 15 years either. But
see, I'd identify as a Simpsons fan. That's definitely one that is, unfortunately, a part of me.
Yeah, me too.
Vastly, it's getting outdated now. People don't get the references.
That's terrible.
So, the kids these days.
It's the children who
They're
are wrong.
Yeah, see, exactly.
For those of you too young to get it. But look, Brady, thank you so much for coming and chatting to this. It's a fascinating topic to talk about. Again, a forever journey, a process for everyone all the time. And again, I just think it's a unique experience being an anime fan, a Western anime fan, because we are a subculture looking at a mass cultural phenomenon, and we do have very little control and or say over the thing that we love the most. And you could argue that a lot of fans are in that situation, but I think particularly anime fans are, because of the geographic and cultural disconnect that we have to it,
One of the things we didn't delve into is like being a Western anime fan, particularly from when we started watching it, versus what's like the crossovers of that. So like gaming, that kind of thing, like those sort of nerdy
JRPGs and
like,
whatnot, which we talked about,
culture kind of all combined into one for a bit there.
Yeah, well,
so it was like you're part of that nerd group. You're like, I'm a nerd. I don't know. It's like it's very different. I think nowadays there's just so much, like there's so much more room to watch everything. I think people are a little less gatekeepy or exclusive about what they consume because they have more access to things.
Yeah.
Yes and no. Depends
Perhaps
where
you
you
have to
are,
break
yeah.
down those further subcultures on another episode.
Oh,
Well, you can talk about this forever. You know what I mean? You
Yeah.
can talk about this forever. And it's just endlessly fascinating. The academic side of it's fascinating as well. Anyway, we'll come back. If you like this episode, let us know. We'd love to come back and talk about it. If it's something that might interest you, let us know in any comments on whatever format you're watching this. And of course, we would like to thank our patrons. They are, of course, Curtis, Grant, Stuart, Dom, Rose, Caroline, Alex, Samantha, and Erica. Thank you guys so much. Means so much.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Catch you later.